Hey, good morning. You guys know who I am. Mr. Robinson, of course. Look, this is the last thing I'm going to go over for the World War I unit. So we've already looked. Now this whole PowerPoint slide has everything that we've covered on it, and I posted this on Canvas. But we've already looked at the causes of the war. Remember those long-term causes? The short-term cause was that assassination. That's the spark that set it off. And then we looked at the causes of the United States getting into the war. Okay, and then we looked at things that were going on in the United States at the time of the war. All right. So now this is the last thing I'm going to cover. We're going to look at what was going on, uh, or the ending of the war, and what the United States, and particularly the President Woodrow Wilson, tried to do. All right, to combat some of these problems that one started the war, but then also got America into the war. So Wilson, no, Woodrow Wilson, you're let's see, 28th president of the United States. Um, Smart guy, okay. So here's a fun fact about him. He is actually uh, in my genealogy. He's related to me, so he probably had a really nice mustache as well. No, I'm just well, he probably did, but he is related to me. He is president of Princeton University. Right, um, the first Southerner elected president since before the Civil War. So, kind of a big deal, not unlike your teacher. But, anyways, these are the things that he did. He comes up with this idea to stop another outbreak of war. It's called the 14 points. He gives out 14 points to stop another war. So, this is some of the things on it. Now I'm going to go through each of the points here to and explain them to you. Now remember, he's trying to stop another world war from happening, but guess what? We do it. They do it again 20 years later, or what is about 23 years later, another world war starts with some of the same countries or most of the same countries. So his plan for peace doesn't really work because one, it's not accepted, and I'll explain that. So the first point: no secret alliances. Remember, secret alliances have been a cause of World War I. If you look at that acronym, MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. All right. His points here are the idea is trying to stop these causes. So the first one, hey, no secret alliances. Everything's got to be out in the open. The second point, ships are able to travel freely in times of war. So upon the seas, he doesn't want any attacks on shipping on the seas. Remember, that's why the United States, one of the main causes of the United States getting into the war, that unrestricted submarine warfare by German U-boats. So this kind of has to do with the idea of imperialism. Remember, trying to rule the seas or areas that are not actually part of your country. All right. So that's the second point. The third point, free trade. Okay. So it's supposed to promote economic growth, but also kind of quell this idea of alliances happening and taking place. So free trade to promote economic growth, and this is also trying to combat imperialism as well. Reducing stockpiles of weapons. This directly has to do with that M in the acronym for the causes of the war, militarism. So instead of countries building up their military, we're just going to reduce the stockpiles of weapons, because the idea behind building up your military is if you're going to build it up, you're probably planning on using it at some point. Um, it's like most people that go and maybe go to the gym and work out, try to flex their muscles. They probably plan on using those muscles for something, whether it's to play a sport or to be some jobs require you to be physically fit, whether it's just for better health. But Militarism has been a cause, so this reducing the stockpiles of weapons is his fourth point. It's trying to combat that idea of militarism that had been taking place. The fifth point, desires of colonial people would be taken into consideration. Again, has to do with imperialism, also nationalism as well. In other words, the idea of nationalism that a country is stronger than another country. All right, we're going to combat that, and then have these considerations of colonial people taking into consideration these desires. All right, so trying to stop imperialism, trying to stop nationalism, or ruling over other people. And then 6 through 13 really has to do with nationalism again. So redrawing the borders, basis of self-determination. Remember, the whole idea, the whole reason the Archduke was assassinated was because he's visiting an area in Serbia that he ruled over, but they didn't want him to rule over them. They wanted their own country. All right, so he gets shot. Boom. Next thing you know, all these other countries are jumping into the war. So that's all these points, 6 through 13, have to deal with all that. He's looking at specific. You can look at the points on your own, but he's looking at specific areas that were ruled over and that had nationalist sentiment in those areas, and he's trying to give them a basis of self-determination. And then for the 14th point, this is important. It's going to be on the test, or we're going to have a quiz on this unit. But countries are going to work together in what's called a League of Nations to resolve conflicts. So the idea behind this is that all the countries join this League of Nations, and then if they have a problem with another country, they can bring it into this League of Nations, and then they can talk it out before the countries are coming to blows with each other. Before, boom, another world war happens. All right. So this is really his big point. Let's form this coalition of a League of Nations where we can talk out or discuss our problems before we have another world war break out. Okay, but it doesn't work because, again, like I said, these countries, they do it again. All right, there's not exactly a rematch, but they do it again. There's another world war in about 22, 23 years. So the League of Nations, the United States, remember, Wilson's the guy who presents this League of Nations. The United States, his own country, doesn't even join the League of Nations. And well, why didn't the United States join the League of Nations? Why did they reject Wilson's plan? The United States goes back to this idea of isolationism, being an isolated country. We want to stay out of conflicts in Europe. So remember, the United States was kind of isolated before the war. Well, going right back after this war is over, we want to go right back to our own selves. Remember, the United States, there's two oceans separating the United States from basically other big continents, besides South America. But we have a Pacific Ocean separating the country from Asia, and we have an Atlantic Ocean separating the country from Europe. So the United States says, look, we want to be isolated again. Now, so they reject Wilson's plan, and the Allies come up with something called this Treaty of Versailles. This is important because the Treaty of Versailles basically is a stepping point to the next World War. So these countries in Europe, France and Britain basically are the big ones. They basically want to put the guilt for the war, World War I, all on Germany. They make Germany pay war damages or war reparations, $33 billion, a lot of money, to the Allies. Also, they have a war guilt clause in the Treaty of Versailles, which makes Germany, again, accept or admit sole responsibility of the war. So what it does, in effect, is it irritates or makes the Germans, it upsets them because they're a very proud people, and now we got to admit that we started the war and that we lost the war, and we got to pay all these countries back. So what they're going to do is they're going to get irritated and upset. They didn't feel like they really lost the war because the war there was no unconditional surrender during the war. They kind of they had a ceasefire, and then Germany said, "All right, we lose, or we just don't want to fight anymore." But a lot of Germans didn't feel like they lost the war, so hey, we're going to put our gloves back on in their mind and do it again. The war guilt clause in the Treaty of Versailles. Remember that. So the Treaty of Versailles, it punished Germany, forced them to pay war reparations. I mentioned that. They also have to give up a large portion of their land. Okay? So it's kind of meant to embarrass them in a sense. And the new nations are created with this Treaty of Versailles. So it punished them financially. They have to pay all this money off. All right. And then it punished their borders. It shrunk their size. And then it like I said, it embarrassed them in a sense, because they had to admit defeat, and then they didn't feel like they really lost the war. They had to admit that they lost the war, and then they started the war. Neither of these they really thought they did. Now here's the League of Nations. The United States. This is kind of a cartoon. The United States is feeling like these other nations are pulling them into a conflict, and their hands are tied. So this is the idea is that the United States we don't want to be involved in this. All right, we want to go back to isolationism. So if we were to join the League of Nations, we would be pulled by these other countries into conflict. The legacy of the war. This is the last slide. So the legacy of the war, again, accelerates change for women with that 19th Amendment that they get. The African Americans start to get a few more rights, but not really until the Civil Rights era are we going to see that they get a lot more rights. But they get some more rights. They're also more widely accepted in the workforce because remember, a lot of African Americans with that Great Migration moved and started working in factories. And then the Red Scare. Remember that communist revolution had broken out and took place in Russia, where the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and the installation of the communist regime. So you have a fear, the first Red Scare. We're going to see another Red Scare too after the Second World War. But you have a first Red Scare is fear of communism. And then the Treaty of Versailles, again, solves nothing. And it's really, in effect, a cause of the Second World War. So tomorrow I'll put the quiz. I may post a quiz later today. The last assignment for the unit is with Wilson's 14 points is on Canvas. And you can look at this video as well.